You know, it's pretty funny how a Pinocchio movie ended up being one of my least favorite movies of the year, and another Pinocchio movie ended up being one of my favorites. This time it's from acclaimed director Guillermo del Toro, who seemed really passionate about this film leading up to its release after it spent years in development hell. Once he finally got his passion project out on Netflix, all those years were made more than worth it with just how great the end product was. While it's definitely a faithful retelling of Carlo Collodi's classic children's story, GDT's Pinocchio also adds plenty of new material to keep this version fresh, especially with it now being set in fascist Italy during World War II. Not only that, but it also goes deep into the concepts it presents and its overall message about life and how it's precious because it's finite, which helps to make way for some powerful emotional moments, especially around the end. And you remember how I said director Guillermo del Toro was really passionate about this movie? Well, in terms of craftsmanship, boy does it show. I already love me some stop-motion animation, even if the medium isn't used a whole lot nowadays, and the amount of care and dedication put in by the animators really shows. Hell, the animators were all prominently credited before the voice actors, whose performances were all great by the way, so that just goes to show that Del Toro isn't lying about how much he values the medium of animation. However, as much as I wish it could have been higher on the list, the songs are ultimately what held it back, since while they're definitely really good, and while the score is wonderful, I felt like the movie could have done a better job committing to being a musical, since sometimes the songs could end a bit abruptly, and they basically just go away after the song where Pinocchio tells Benito Mussolini to eat shit and gets killed for doing so. Yes, that actually happened. But other than that very tiny nitpick, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is a love letter to not just the classic story, but to animation in general from someone who genuinely appreciates and sees value in the medium. And in times like these where animation continues to be looked down upon by the mainstream, that's genuinely refreshing to see.
Congratulations, a tiny boy!
Wholesome and cute things are great. It gives you this warm and fuzzy feeling inside that just lets you temporarily forget about all the horrible things in the world and make you go, aww, and that definitely applies to Marcel the Shell with shoes on. On the surface, it's nothing special. It's a slow-paced mockumentary about a tiny, sentient, stop-motion shell searching for his family. However, what makes Marcel the Shell one of the year's best movies is the fact that it's nothing special. Although I do wish it was just a tiny bit longer, the pacing in the film is basically perfect, giving us a lot of time to vibe with Marcel and learn more about his life, with the mockumentary format being a nice touch. In addition, its themes about not letting the past control you, being able to connect with the world around you, and how the risks you take can pay off in the end really resonated with me and my experiences in life. Plenty of the other themes were also very well handled, such as the negative impacts of being famous, finding your purpose in life, and the value a real-life community has on your life as opposed to strangers behind a screen. The latter also resonated with me as someone with not a lot of real-life friends. Along with the great themes, the two main characters we focus on, Marcel and Nana Connie, are extremely endearing. I like the way Marcel is portrayed where he's not just a naive child, but he's resourceful, dedicated, and he cares about the people he loves, the latter even to a fault. Nana Connie also provided some great moments of dialogue between her and her grandson, and her death scene was just... well, I never thought I'd be crying my eyes out over a shell, but this movie sure as hell proved me wrong. And there's still plenty for me to discuss regarding this movie. Dean Fleischer-Camp's direction was great. This was actually his directorial debut, so I look forward to seeing what he does in the future. The score from Disaster Piece was very enjoyable to listen to, and the stop motion used on the shells had a nice charm to it. Overall, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On is easily one of 2022's best movies, and easily its most wholesome. If you're in the market for a new comfort flick or just something cute to enjoy, watching this movie should be a priority. When the video is done, that is.
Wow, Tom Cruise!
So I found this comment on my part 1 video of someone saying Top Gun Maverick better not be number 1, so to the person who made that comment, you're welcome. Even if it's number 3 though, Top Gun Maverick is one of the most surprising movies I've seen this year. The first one is definitely a classic cheesy 80s flick, but this one soars above and beyond to deliver what I consider to be one of the best sequels out there and probably the best legacy sequel I've ever seen. Let's start with one of the movie's main selling points, the action, because it looks amazing. Since there was very little CGI used and the actors actually did fly in F-18s at ridiculously high speeds, the action here is very exhilarating and captivating, especially compared to a lot of other CGI-fueled blockbusters where the stakes don't feel as high as they should due to the stuff on screen not being real. Not to mention, the cinematography is just gorgeous. How it was one of the few Oscar categories this movie was snubbed from is completely beyond me, because some of the shots in this movie are a sight to behold. And surprisingly enough, Top Gun Maverick exceeds at stuff beyond the action scenes. There's also plenty of strong emotional scenes with the movie's core themes about legacy and tradition versus modern convenience, making way for plenty of well-directed and well-acted emotional scenes that were able to hit me pretty hard at some points. Honestly, it's refreshing how, unlike a lot of other legacy sequels, Maverick honors the legacy of its predecessor while still adding some new things to the table to fully justify its existence. For one, despite being almost 60 when filming, Tom Cruise still feels just as energetic and charismatic as he was almost 40 years ago. He has some excellent chemistry with both Miles Teller and Jennifer Connelly, and I like how the movie really plays with the idea of his age and if he can finally confront his past trauma while training a new generation of fighter pilots. Plus, Val Kilmer makes a brief cameo in one scene, and even if he didn't really talk due to his throat cancer, it was still nice to see him, and I liked his conversation with Maverick. I could go on, but at the end of the day, Top Gun Maverick is a movie that shouldn't have worked as well as it did. Legacy sequels and remakes are almost always terrible imitations of what came before, so it would have been really easy for the people working on it to just do the bare minimum for the sake of nostalgia. However, thankfully, that wasn't the case, as the incredibly talented people working on this movie went the extra mile to deliver one of 2022's best movies, and one of the most surprising ones at that. Speaking of surprisingly good movies... How? Seriously, how? How is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish of all things not only the second best movie I saw in 2022, but also one of the best animated movies I've ever seen in my entire life? Out of all things, a sequel to an okay animated movie from 11 years ago ended up being this good? How? Well, let me explain why. Basically, everyone at this point has been singing the praises of this movie, so forgive me if I sound like a broken record, but everything you've heard about it is true. Let's start with the animation, because whoo boy is it incredible. The astronomical impact of Spider-Verse continues to shine with Puss in Boots 2, where it abandons the realistic and saturated art style of the Shrek franchise in favor of looking vibrant and colorful, with the art style feeling a lot more painterly to give off the vibes of a classic fairy tale story. And whenever the frame rate drops, it's basically guaranteed that the scene is gonna be awesome. It really helps to make the action scenes feel a lot more dynamic and visually striking, which I'm sure you'd want from high-octane action scenes, and the excellent score by Heitor Pereira also helps these scenes out a great deal. But animation is just one thing, and there's plenty of movies with great animation that fall short in the writing department. How's the rest of the movie? Well, it's still just as good. For one, like something I previously talked about on this list, it's also got a message about the importance of life and living it to the fullest, exemplified by Puss's encounters with death. Holy shit, I love this movie's portrayal of death. As in, he's the literal Grim Reaper, not just the mere concept of death. Not only is he intimidating, but he really helps to convey the fact that death is inevitable and it will come for all of us eventually. However, instead of fearing it, it's important to live your life well so that when it's finally your time to go, you'll have a fulfilling life to look back on. Plus, he kinda wins in the end because even if he decides to spare Puss and let him live out the remainder of his final life, he still can't be defeated and he'll still come for Puss later, like how death will always come for us eventually.
You know we will meet again, right?
Sí, hasta la muerte.
And that panic attack scene, man, it just gets me every time. I love how basically everyone thought Perito would be an annoying comic relief jackass and how he proved us all wrong by being very endearing and adorable, and this scene is proof of just how great he is. Instead of him berating Puss for his anxiety or telling him to get a grip or anything like that, he comforts him, gives him the time he needs to calm down, and then lets him talk about what's on his mind. It's a poignant, emotionally hard-hitting scene that also sends a great message to young viewers that it's okay to be scared sometimes and that there'll always be people who listen to you and understand your struggles. Wow, I just went off on a major tangent with all that stuff, so let's get back on track now. If there's one other thing that Puss in Boots 2 does surprisingly well, it's the way that it handles its large cast. Because with the exception of Avengers Infinity War and maybe Encanto, plenty of movies with large casts can end up buckling under the weight of having so many characters to focus on that some can end up feeling more like floaters than three-dimensional characters. With Puss in Boots 2, on the other hand, all its main characters get plenty of time to shine. From Puss coming to terms with his mortality, to Kitty learning to open up and trust people more, to Perito becoming friends with the two cats and helping them get to the wishing star while figuring out who he truly is, in addition to his genuinely heartbreaking backstory, the main trio all have some decent development. But what about the three villains? Well, it still does a great job balancing them all. I already talked at length about how great Death was, but Goldilocks also serves as a good sort of antagonist because even if she and the bears are criminals, they still care deeply about each other, and seeing Goldie come full circle and deciding to renounce her wish in favor of keeping the family she already has was very heartwarming. Plus, in a time of animated movies sticking to either twist villains or no villain at all in favor of the main conflict being some sort of misunderstanding between the characters, looking at you Disney, Jack Horner was very refreshing, seeing as how he's just pure evil for the entire duration of the film, not to mention he has tons of hilarious moments while still being a legitimate threat. With all that said, I don't know what else there is for me to say about Puss in Boots: The Last Wish that hasn't already been said by basically everyone else. It really does live up to the hype, and while I preferred my number one pick just a tiny bit more, this one was still phenomenal, and I can't wait to see what DreamWorks will do for Shrek 5. Now, before we get to the best movie of 2022, here's a few honorable mentions. I saw a lot of movies this year, so not every one of them could make the list. But here's some that are still worth mentioning because they do have a lot of merit that I don't just want to ignore. Avatar: The Way of Water. Visually speaking, it's incredible, and it has some solid world building and great acting. There were some points where I could feel the 3-hour runtime, but otherwise it's definitely a superior sequel to what came before, and the CGI steals the show. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. While it was a bit long, and while the still admittedly good villain wasn't as good as the villain in the first Black Panther, this was easily able to be one of Phase 4's strongest outputs with some actually good-looking visuals for the most part, some nice cinematography, great direction, and a tasteful and moving tribute to Chadwick Boseman. The Bob's Burgers movie. I haven't seen much of the original show, but I still found this to be a very charming watch with plenty of funny and wholesome moments to go around, some nice 2D animation, enjoyable songs, although I wish the movie could have had a better focus on being a musical, and an interesting mystery story with some good build-up. Fans of the show are sure to get a kick out of this, but for anyone who hasn't watched the show, I'd say that this is a pretty good starting point. Elvis. So let me just say, Austin Butler knocked it out of the park with his portrayal of the King of Rock. And I didn't even mind the long runtime and pacing, since Elvis Presley himself had a very eventful and all-over-the-place life, plus the costume design and production design were excellent. However, Tom Hanks' performance as the Colonel was pretty bad, and some of the historic liberties were a bit odd, so that's why it's just an honorable mention. Glass Onion. It started rough with some very cringy r/fellow kids humor, but once the characters arrived at the titular mansion, things quickly went uphill with plenty of clever twists and turns, great pacing, and a unique story structure. The Lost City. I'm not the biggest fan of rom-coms myself, so this one was very refreshing with it also being an exciting adventure film, plus the romance aspect was well written with the two lead actors having some really enjoyable chemistry. The Sea Beast. It supplies no shortage of well-directed, high-octane swashbuckler action with some beautiful animation to boot. It probably would have been higher if the writing was a bit more original, but for what it was worth, I still had a great time. Turning Red. One of Pixar's more unique products in recent memory, the zany animation style and funny jokes were enjoyable in addition to the commentary on puberty being pretty well handled, although I personally saw the panda powers as my own metaphor for neurodivergency. However, there were a few cringeworthy scenes, and the Karen mom is genuinely one of my least favorite characters in all of fiction, but that doesn't do much to detract from what is otherwise a cute and fun movie. Wendell and Wild. After a 13-year break from directing, Henry Selick really hit the ground running with his return thanks to this movie's great stop-motion animation, humor, voice acting, and horror elements, although the messy plot structure held it back from being any higher on the list. And finally, The Woman King. I was very hesitant to include this one and almost decided to omit it from my ranking because of the large amount of controversy surrounding it apparently glorifying a country of slave traders. While I can definitely understand why people would see it that way, the movie does say that slavery is immoral, so I don't know whose side to take. Looking beyond that though, it's a solid movie with some great acting and exhilarating action scenes, so at least it had that going for it. But yeah, I'm already sure I'll be getting some ugly looks for this pick. Again, this is just my opinion, so let's try and be civil in the comments, okay? Alright, on to my number one pick. I don't think it's all that surprising that I'd say the best movie of 2022 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like Puss in Boots 2, it's received universal acclaim from the general public, and after watching it, yeah, I can see why. It might be a bit hard for me to explain why it's so good, but for the sake of this video, I'll try my best to do so. Now yes, if there's one thing we can all agree on with EEAAO, it's the fact that it is insane, and that insanity works. Thanks to the stellar direction from the Daniels, there's some fantastic world building where all the concepts are understandable without being complicated, and the multiverse plotline is actually explored to the fullest potential, coupled with some electrifying action scenes, gorgeous cinematography, fantastic editing, and several laugh-out-loud hilarious moments. And surprisingly enough, it has a perfect balance of being both silly and serious. Despite this being a movie with a hot dog finger universe, a singing raccoon voiced by Randy Newman, and a butt plug fight, EEAAO also supplies some deep and thought-provoking themes about depression and existentialism that can make way for some powerful emotional scenes. Again, with all the stuff I've described about this movie, I wouldn't have expected a movie with all that crazy shit in it to make me sob like a baby, but I also didn't think something like Puss in Boots 2 would make me cry, and I was proven dead wrong, so what should I expect anymore? Helping the movie's emotional core out would have to be the actors, because all of them were great. From Michelle Yeoh giving what I'd consider to be the best performance of her entire acting career, to Ke Huy Quan and Stephanie Hsu excelling in the emotional scenes, to the rest of the movie's cast providing a solid amount of humor and heart, the actors are another aspect of EEAAO that I can't ignore. What else is there for me to say that someone else can explain better than I can even try? Honestly, I don't know. It's hard for me to sum up how I feel about Everything Everywhere All at Once simply with words, so sorry if this entry is shorter than it should have been, but it's still easily one of the most creative, visionary, and ingenious works of film I've ever seen in my entire life. It's perfect in just about every way imaginable, and as previously mentioned, it deserved every bit of praise it received. Please, go watch this movie. I promise you will not regret it. As for me, however, all that's left for me to say is that, yeah, this is my #1 favorite movie of 2022. Maybe it's a predictable choice, but I still think it's the best. Well, I'm finally done with this video. It took me quite a while given how I still have a life to live and how I'm also making other videos in the meantime, but yeah, I'm all done. And what a year 2022 was. We're already almost 4 months through 2023, and while I've seen my fair share of dog shit, plenty of gems have already come out that I'll be sure to highlight when I do this again in 2024. And there's still plenty more movies that have yet to come out that can end up being really great, so there's a lot to look forward to in terms of future videos. Anyways, thanks for watching this video and for your patience leading up to it. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!